Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Game Club. I'm Graham.
And I'm George.
And we have a very special podcast discussion today. We're going to be talking about all things Zenless. My thoughts, George's questions, and maybe a little more. We'll see you then. Wow, George, here we are at the end of a way too short tuning test.
Is there a hole in your heart left behind by the beta now that you can't access it?
Oh my gosh, yes. I actually turned it on this morning. There was some settings I wanted to check, but they weren't available to me at the main menu, and I just was like, maybe I'll try and log in just to see, and yeah, unfortunately not.
It's like you're like picking the nachos, the salsa, and you're just like trying to scoop the last tiny bit, but it's not, you can't get it.
Yeah, exactly, pretty much. What a delicious salsa it was, man. I have a lot of things to say about it, but there are a couple things we want to talk about just before.
Yes. First off, before we get started, a big thank you to everyone who tuned into the live streams for your comments, your likes. I had a crazy weekend for stuff that we don't need to get into right now, and so I wanted to be more present on the live streams than I was overall, but even my time there, I enjoyed it. I know Graham had a fantastic time. The overwhelming amount of love and support we've been receiving lately is just absolutely humbling. I can't believe that we're in this situation.
Yeah,
and frankly, I don't know about you, Grant, but I kind of like feel a little bit of responsibility. Like, we got to make sure we do good content for you guys, and so that's kind of where I'm coming at. But overall, guys, like, a big thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Seriously.
Yeah, seriously, it was a really special time. Like, honestly, originally we thought like, oh, we're just gonna focus on like only video content, maybe doing a little bit of initial stream, but just kind of the way everything turned out, I started streaming a lot more, and people were just coming and having, good questions, and whether it be randoms or people who kept coming back. Like, it was an awesome experience. It was great. So hopefully everyone who watched, you're looking forward to some of the content we'll make. And speaking of some of the content we're going to make, we had initial plans of doing character videos for all the characters, breaking down, showing their animations, breaking down how they play from a design perspective. Unfortunately, that was just before the beta announced that it was going to be ending within like about 24 hours. So our plans have quite drastically changed because of that. We weren't able to get all that footage. We weren't able to take the time that we needed to get a full understanding of the characters and stuff like that. So unfortunately, that's indefinitely postponed. We do plan on picking that up when the game comes out. And then we've got a bunch of other little videos too, but I'm not going to spoil those just yet.
Yes, so stay tuned for that. We got a little bit of work ahead of us. I started with the indexing of all our footage today. Whew, we have a ton of footage, so it's going to take a bit to go through that. I'm just going in with a fine-tooth comb, like sweeping everything I can find, and we got like Excel sheets and all this stuff ready to go. So it's going to take a bit, but we'll come out with that as soon as we can, and we'll try and make it as comprehensive as possible with all that we know of the game currently. So stay tuned. Just for anyone new to our channel who didn't watch the live streams, or just anyone who's curious, I want to list off Graham's achievements in the beta, because this kid went full hog on the whole thing. He got to proxy level 22, which I don't know if anyone else has gotten that high. If you've seen someone who's level 23 or higher, please let us know down in the comments, because we're genuinely curious to see if anyone else got that high. He beat the hardest commission available in the tuning test. It's called Arena of the Mighty, and he beat it in Legendary Proxy, Legendary Speed, found 2 commissions that were hidden, not readily available in the menu, 100%ed the entire game, completed all the other commissions and objectives in the beta, and he collected all the available Etherium, spent a ton of time looking at all the characters, their movesets and all that stuff. So he did it all. Anything that you could do in the beta, Graham did. And I say this more as a way to qualify what he's about to say, so that it's, he comes from a place where he knows what he's talking about. I want to talk him up a little bit as well, but he comes from a place of knowledge, and hopefully people can take that into account.
All right, now let's get into my thoughts on the Zenless Beta. So I have lots of things to say. Hopefully I'll remember to say all the things I wanted to say, but we're going to do this in like a QA style, because George was either away or he, when he was there, he wasn't able to play. And so George has a lot of questions. I got a lot of questions on the live stream, and I have things I want to say. So we're going to kind of have George give those questions to me, and we're going to just have discussions about those topics.
Yes, we've compiled stuff from multiple sources and just are trying to get as much information out. Right. So the first thing, I've seen a lot of comments about this. I know you have as well. And I know some people came into the live stream to ask you or us about what our thoughts were. So first off, What do you think about the game's difficulty?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. It's very difficult. It would be very easy for me to just say that the game is on the easier side, but I think this is a really difficult question to kind of unpack. Let me explain in full. I think that the game's difficulty is unaccessible. And that may seem like a bit of a cop-out answer, and I'm going to explain what that means and why in like a lot of detail here. So forgive me for being a little bit long-winded. You just have to put it in the perspective of a game that has a progression, right? Let's pretend, we don't know for sure what the max level is, but let's pretend Zenless runs from levels, character levels, not proxy level, but character levels 1 to 100. When you play a game that has a progression curve, and when you're making a game as a developer, you have content that spans all of those levels with the express idea of getting people to level 100. Now, the problem becomes in progression content, you have a piece of level 20 content. A player may do that at level 15, they may do it at level 20, and they may do it at 25. They could do it at 40. But you don't know as a developer exactly, you can have an idea of the range that generally people will do a piece of content, but you don't know exactly what it's going to be. And the variable between levels, especially at that point, is so wide. So I may experience that content and think it's really easy. And you may experience that content and think it was really hard. It all depends on a lot of variables. And the biggest thing is those levels. And so it's very difficult from that angle to progress or to analyze any kind of progression content whatsoever. Because even if they took the time to very meticulously tune a level 20 piece of content, it's all for nothing because it could all be invalidated by a higher or lower level. So that's not really worth their time. So what they do is they put all of that content on a general difficulty curve. They don't really tune it per se. They just kind of put it in a general area of this stuff is is less difficult than this stuff, but it's all kind of on a curve, right? Because we don't really know. They put all of their effort into tuning the end game stuff, and I'll explain that in a second, but I also want to talk about the beginning of a game, and especially gacha games, especially the difficulty conversation is especially volatile because gacha games are really focused on getting people in the door. They want you to come in, they want you to feel strong, they want you to just like wreck all the enemies and have a great time so that you feel like, yeah, this game is awesome, I'm having a great time, I'm just doing great stuff. And the difficulty comes at least much later because they want to bring people in. So not only is the curve difficult to assess because of progression reasons, the beginning of the game is especially volatile in difficulty. So that's like the first core thing of this argument is like that whole thing is very difficult to assess. The other half is all of the difficulty tuning comes at the end game when you know that player characters are going to be level 100, so there's no variance in stats from a level perspective. Now, there is variance when it comes to artifacts, or in Zenless cases, it was the CDs. So there will be some stat variance there. However, at the beginning of a game, when you go to the first section of endgame content, you have like the starter difficulty. Let's say there's easy, normal, and hard. And so when players are fresh endgame characters or players, they get to the endgame content and they have to start with easy, right? Because Hoyo knows you're going to come in there with max level characters and your artifacts are going to be okay. They're going to be stuff you got through progression. They weren't end game material, but they're decent enough. And then you go in there and they can tune that difficulty, that easy difficulty, to be just right for those players coming in because they know exactly where you are now. There's no guessing game anymore. You're exactly at this point. And then once you go and farm out, let's say easy, or you get through some of the easy stuff, and they'll know, okay, now we know they've been getting artifacts from this. They know the drops, obviously they put them there. So then they can go to hard, or sorry, they can go to normal. The last point, once they're finished with normal, they can get to hard. And then they really know where everyone is. They know that everyone has not top of the line artifacts, like best rerolled stats. They know that you're a level 100 and they know you have really good artifacts, generally speaking. And so they can now very fine tune on this very specific variable. There's no huge level gaps. There's no, how good are their artifacts. It's if you got to this point, we know that it's going to be a very specific way. And so then they can start tuning. That's where the difficulty conversation can come in. Unfortunately, I think people who are making assessments on the game's difficulty before analyzing that, or even without even giving that explanation, that's a caveat. If you want to have any conversation about difficulty, I think what I've just explained is something that needs to be said first before anyone can have a conversation about difficulty. Because if you don't keep that in mind, then the game just looks too easy and it's like, well, the game's too easy. This is dumb, right? I understand. I understand why you would come to that conclusion, but you have to look at it in the greater context.
I mean, it makes sense, right? You wouldn't judge Monster Hunter based off of low rank. That's no way to judge the difficulty of the game, because if you think low rank's too easy, well, hey, guess what? It's low rank. That's kind of what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be your introduction into the game as you start ramping up, leveling up, getting better gear sets and all that stuff. So yeah, I know that makes perfect sense.
100. That's a really good example. Yeah, if it would be like judging the progression content would be like judging Monster Hunter based on low rank. Because it's labeled low rank in Monster Hunter, it's easy to say like, well, don't analyze it based on that. But because progression content just has like a level number on it and people just like play the levels and just assess the difficulty, I understand why it's easy to make that reaction. But yes, that's a great example to kind of display what I'm saying. The other thing is in the beta, there actually was a high risk holo that had like really two of the commissions weren't that high level, but one of them was like specifically made for, we know that players can only get so far. So in the beta, the soft cap for levels was level 40. We couldn't get the item to break level 40. And there wasn't really a lot of artifacts in the game or CD drives to equip to our characters. So Hoyoverse knew that we would have generally kind of middling stuff. And people aren't going to be really farming for a lot of artifacts, right? So it's not like they're assuming we'd have really good artifacts. But they knew that generally, at least in this one instance, that we would be coming in with level 40 characters with middling artifacts. So I played this mission several times. My experience with that particular mission was really, really good. It was excellent. I would say the balancing on that mission was excellent. And I think, again, this is not to dismiss anyone's argument. I think the only conversation you can have about difficulty throughout the whole beta is if you played that specific mission, and then we can only talk about the balancing for that mission. Because in my opinion, that's the only mission that received any type of thoughtful balancing when it came to difficulty. And it was spot on. I had level 40 characters. They had level 5 and level 10 artifacts on all of their slots. So I was kind of right in that middle section of like having a good build. It was awesome. There was a timer so you could clear it at any time you wanted, right? Which is great. I think that's awesome. There was also like a timer that if you beat it within 2,500 seconds, which is like 41 minutes, then you would be able to get gold for like a gold clear of like the objective stuff. I cleared it in about 38 minutes compared to the 41. Not a flex, by the way. I think that was like a pretty average, like it was a pretty average run. And I think it really speaks to the fact that Hoyoverse knew exactly how to tune that. I had enough leeway for me to be a little bit slower, to make a little bit more mistakes, and to maybe even like run a different build, maybe a more supporty centric build of like characters, or like bringing in less DPS focus, because my characters were mostly DPS focus. If I had changed out some characters to maybe be a little more supporty, then like Aokaku has some like support stuff, and her damage is maybe a little bit, again, assessing damage at this low level is almost moot, but like she has some supporty stuff, we'll say. So we'll pretend that she does less damage. So I had the crux of what I'm saying is I had room for error and for being a little less efficient, and I could still get a gold clear. I also felt like I was really pushed, right? The difficulty was pushing me
that's good.
Do better. You know, the stats were just an opportunity for me to get into the fights with the bosses, and then that's when my skill would take over. So if you take away anything from what all this rambling is, the difficulty was just right, and it felt like my skill mattered more than my stats at that point, because the stats were just to get me to the door, and once I was in the door, it was all skill. And so it felt incredible. I had a great time. It was like, you know that feeling that you get, and hopefully like people can appreciate this, but you know that feeling you get when you're really fighting a difficult boss and you got to really practice it and you got to learn it. It feels like 100% of the responsibility is on you. It's not like cheap. The boss the telegraphs were really good. They were amazing, very clear. You know, you got to watch the body language of the boss. There is even some helpful indications for when attacks are being made to make it all clear. I think across the board, enemy tells were super awesome. They were very clear most of the time. Some of the character effects got a little visually noisy, and that could make it sometimes difficult to read. Other than that, like seriously, the difficulty was peak. It was just right. I don't know how the difficulty will be when the game is out on their actual end game content, but if this difficulty tuning that they had for this mission is an indication for how good it's going to be at the end, this game is going to be fantastic. The difficulty is going to be just right, and I think people will really, really like it. And so that's my excessively long take on the question, is the game difficult? Is it, what's the game difficulty like? So
long-winded or not, that was a great explanation. I think you most certainly answered that question. I think you make some very solid points. It's almost so self-evident that I can see why maybe some people skim over that as they're playing the game. But yeah,
right.
you don't judge the difficulty of a game by content that's supposed to be progression content.
Right.
It's pretty straightforward. Well, we have another question here that I know you saw a lot live stream. I did as well.
Okay.
What do you think about the charge system? I think I don't want to put words in your mouth, actually, so go for it. What did you think about the charge system?
Sure. The charge system, so for anyone who doesn't know, the charge system is like the stamina or resin system, the currency that basically you accumulate over time and you use it to do the missions and basically generally progress the game. This is really similar in vein to the progression conversation that we just had. First of all, it's a beta, so the numbers are very much in flux. People will say like, well, you should give feedback even though it's in beta. 100%, I absolutely agree. However, your spending habits of charge or stamina or resin is fundamentally different when you're going through the progression of a gacha game versus when you're at the end game. When you're doing the story, it costs charge, and what you get out of that resource-wise is very little. You're only doing it to make progress in the story to then get to the end game. Of course, you're doing it to view the story. I'm not kind of discounting that, but I'm saying that's the primary objective. You may be able to only do 3 missions, we'll say, a day or something based on the stamina. That's not it, obviously. That's just an example number. At the end game, maybe you can do like 5. Maybe it's more, or maybe it's less, right? The end game structure of how you spend on like the difficult missions or the grindy missions is going to be a little bit different from how you spend it in the story mode stuff. So it's very difficult, and that economy is going to change. Like, it's very difficult to give a full analysis given that context. The other thing is, Hoyoverse is going to very meticulously make the charge economy. They are going to very meticulously decide how fast they want you to get through the game. At the beginning of a gacha game, they want you to run net positives on charge. So you get in the game and it's like, we have 100 missions for players to do. But at the beginning, we want players to be able to do 10 missions on their first sit down to play. Whether that's, they don't know how many days that's going to be you play, but they want those first missions to always be able to be snappy. You can go from mission to mission to mission. But then they only want you to do 1 mission a day. Again, example numbers. This is just for illustration purposes, right?
Yes.
Then you hit the roadblock, and they have based on how much content we can make and how fast we want players to progress through the story or end game or grind or whatever it is, we have a roadmap. They're not going to set out that particular roadmap until their content complete. You couldn't, right? If they set out a roadmap and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we're adding in 20 more levels to the release of the game. It's like, crap, we got to redo this content, this charge roadmap now of how fast we want players to progress. So now we have to reassess, right? That's just on top of the thing I said previously about how difficult it is to really assess if the charge levels are proper or not. And the other thing is, as beta testers, we got mail that gave us a lot of charge. We were also spending the premium film currency on charge because we know that there was no gacha, and we know that we would get more through the mail, so we would just spend it there. So our view of it, even if we could assess it, which I'm not saying we even can, our view of it would be automatically skewed. Like, I could make a little bit of assessment on the difficulty. I think you can make 0 assessment on the charge economy and how that works, because there was no way for us to properly engage with that system in any way. So my answer to that question is, there's no way to answer it, and that explanation is essentially saying this is why the answer sucks. Yeah, it's a sucky answer, honestly, but I have to explain at least why. So
no, that's fair enough. Yeah, for sure. I like what you said about how they're gonna finely tune the charge economy, right? Like, they have a roadmap and they know how soon they can release content, and they essentially don't want characters catching up so much that they're waiting weeks, months, who knows, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for more Zenless content. That doesn't make for a fun and engaging game whatsoever. So I hear a lot of people sometimes like, well, I just want to play it. I don't know why they're limiting my playtime. I want to just keep playing the game. And you say that, but you can only do and you can only grind so much before you get bored and are desiring something new. And if they're not ready to release anything new, then the whole thing of you saying, well, I just want to play the game, that argument disappears, because then you no longer want to play the game. You're just bored and you're just sitting there with nothing to do. So it's a very fine balance. And as more betas come out and as things go on and as they know what they're going to release, they're going to be able to better set that. And for now, trust that they'll do right by the players, and we'll just wait and see.
And I think a lot of it comes down to, like, in Genshin Impact, they have the open world. So when you run out of resin, you at least have this like fun, explorable world, right? Gacha games are fundamentally different from, they're like long-term service games, right? You're not supposed to necessarily max it out. You're supposed to have a trickle over time. And you're also not supposed to play it 24/7 like you could a typical game. When you play a single player game, you get through it and then you finish it and you're done. And maybe DLC comes out later, but you get to the end. To push back a little bit on what you said of like, I just want to play it, and therefore, you know, once you hit the stamina, you're not allowed to play it anymore kind of thing. You just have to accept the fact that you can't. I agree and disagree with that. I think from a progression standpoint, you're not allowed to play anymore, because that's just kind of how it works, right? I think that's actually fine. I don't have any problem with that. However, I do think Genshin does it right, where they have this big open world that you can generally go and play the game still without making really specific progress, right? And I think Zenless needs to have an answer to that question, to allow players to play the game and maybe even get a small amount of resources, maybe 1/10 of what the charge experience would give you, to keep players engaged on a gameplay level if they so desire. And I think Genshin, as I said, Genshin does that great. They have a great balance between the open world and the resin stuff. I don't know what their answer to that is. There was no answer to that in the beta. Everything cost charge. I expect and hope, and one of the feedbacks I guess I'm giving now, but I gave to Hoyo, is there needs to be some kind of option, right? Give me a very basic or generic roguelike mode where I can go in, have a lot of fun playing the game. If it's not going to cost any charge, don't give me any rewards. Or even better than not giving rewards, if you could give rewards, just give 10%. So like, if I run this 10 times, it's equal to 1 charge. It's insanely inefficient, but at least you get something. It feels good to get at least something. Like getting nothing, just being like, and I know it's like, well, why don't you play the game for fun? 100%. But you can't deny the fact that getting things also is part of the fun of playing. So if you just give a reduced amount, maybe that's a happy medium. So that's kind of my opinion on like having that balance between being able to play consistently all the time and not blowing out the progression curve that they're meticulously planning based on their ability to deliver content over time.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about the open world of Genshin, because you could go, you could collect items, you can collect all this other stuff. You could do exploration aspects that don't require resin. I was, in my mind, I was thinking primarily of Dragalia Lost, right? Like that game, you played it, ran out of stamina, boom, you're done. You got to set your phone down. You got to wait for that stamina to recharge. And I think you're right. There should be something to continue keeping the players engaged. Obviously, these are just like my very initial thoughts. I haven't, of course, done some deep thinking on it, but I kept thinking as you were saying that the hub area has a lot of potential for something like that. We know that they could introduce some sort of mini game, maybe some social aspects. That's really hard in a gacha like this, but that's what came to mind, right? I'm like, I wonder if they could do something within the hub, right? You're maybe not necessarily going into the hollows and getting the rewards, but there's something additional for you to do besides going in and running through the core content of the game. Yeah,
there's so many venues for them to do stuff. I think I think people are really going to be most hungry for like continuous gameplay, but absolutely there's some like longevity things they can do in the hub area, especially with character interaction stuff. So absolutely.
The next question. What do you think about the mechanics of the game? Are they like the character mechanics? Are they too simple, too complex, not enough? What do you think?
Thankfully, this will not be as long-winded as my other answers, but that's a good question, actually. It's a really good question. Initially, my reaction was that it might be on the simple side. And that was because my initial reaction to the game was, this is pretty easy. As I got into, without going too much into it, as I got into that final fight that had some pretty meaty difficulty, I started to see really what the game was trying to do from a mechanical perspective. Miyabi is a character that has a simple mechanic, and a lot of the characters have a straightforward or generally simple mechanic where her ability is at the end of her combo, she gets a charge point. We'll call it generically a charge point. And when she uses an EX ability, her EX special, which is when she has like enough charge on her meter and she hits her special, she gets, if she lands that move, she gets another charge point. You have to get 3 charge points, and then you can click and hold your basic attack, and then she does like a super strong attack and spends those, and then you have to build it up. This is a simple mechanic. This is not some revolutionary thing. There's not a lot of room for interpretation of how you go about it, but there is a little bit. So you could decide that it's too risky to do my full combo, and so you build it slower by only using your EX. Or you weave in your EX in between the combos. Like I found myself doing like a full combo and then weaving in 2 EXs because I felt like that was a good for me. I liked the flow of that, right? And then you spend it. Again, it's not complicated, but it leaves just enough for people to innovate on that kind of thing. If you are playing in easy content, like that progression content, you're naturally going to have way too much time to think about that mechanic, right? You're sitting in there, you don't really have to think about enemies, you just kill them really easy, and you build up the meter and you spend it. You don't really even think about it. It's just not even something. So it's like, this mechanic is too simple. The game is too easy. Listen, I get that. But when you take it into a high pressure situation where you really have to watch the boss, you got to watch some of your positioning. You don't always have big windows to do your full combo. You really start to have to assess the boss and the situation more and paying attention to other things other than just focusing entirely on that single kind of simple mechanic. Then you start to see where that simplistic mechanic kind of fits into the greater picture of the combat. Yes, that mechanic is simple, but they want it to be simple because when the game is pushing back in difficulty on you, you're not going to have the luxury of focusing just on that mechanic. That mechanic is going to be a part of your dodging, your positioning, having windows for dealing damage, burst phases when you get the boss broken or staggered, right? So that's where it starts to become a full picture. So is the game too simple? There are characters that are much, much more simple. There are also characters that are medium complexity, I'll say like Miyabi. And then there are characters that are much more complicated, like Vaughn. Vaughn has 2 different whole attack strings for his basic attack. He has like a spammy click one where you just click, or you can do a charged version where you can just ignore that initial combo completely. You can hold the charge, and then he does a charged attack, and then you have 2 more like combo string charge attacks that you can do after that. And you can't just like click and hold, click and hold, click and hold. You have to know the timing of when that first click and hold attack finished, and then release and click again within that window to go to the next one, and then click again and go to the next one. Try doing that while you're fighting this boss that's absolutely wiping the floor with your face, right? It's not a complicated mechanic, but it doesn't have to be. It has to be just complicated enough in the context of the whole system. So I think so far from what I've seen, the complexity has been just right based on what I've seen from the combat. It's not a full answer. I'm not going to commit to saying that it's just perfect and like it doesn't need anything else. And I'm not going to say it's too simple. I'm going to say from my experience so far, the game is not too simple. The game is not overly complicated either. I think people are going to be really satisfied with what they see from the complexity given in the game. Again, it's difficult to assess that on the easier missions for sure, 100%.
Yeah.
I just want to mention one thing. If you have not heard of an innovator versus a honer, these are fighting game terms. If you should look up a video from Core A Gaming where he talks about innovators versus honers. Basically,
we'll actually link it in the description for anyone who's curious.
Yes, and for anyone who wants just a Reader's Digest version from that, or a Watcher's Digest version, I guess. Basically, innovators are taking like combo strings and they're like customizing. They want like all these different ways to customize your combos because they want different ways to like, oh, what if I do this stack into this and this will give me a different combat string, and what about this and this and this, and like they're coming up with all these like intricate ways to do their characters. Honers are people that take something on the more simplistic side and they hone that craft to like absolute perfection. One of these is not better than the other. This is a purely style thing. I am much more of a honer, and I think Zenless leans on the honing side. However, I don't think that people who are innovators will find the game too lacking. I do think that it's like a 60-40. There's a lot of opportunities, more opportunity on the 60% side for honers to really hone these characters. Like the dodge mechanic. The dodge mechanic is the best thing in the whole video game. It feels so freaking good. The dodge is so perfect. I just wish they could turn up the enemy aggression to max. So I literally just dodge attack, the whole thing. Like, it was amazing. That's the best thing of the whole game. If they didn't have the dodge mechanic the way they did, I would honestly have a very different opinion of the combat system. But the dodge mechanic is the linchpin to the whole combat system.
Apparently, that's pretty big.
It's perfect. It's honestly perfect. I'm so in love with it. But that's like a very Honer's thing, right? This is the core of the combat is the Honer. The 40% of the combat is the Innovator. You look at characters like Vaughn, and to a smaller degree, you look at characters like Miyabi. Miyabi is, as I said, I came up with doing a combo into 2 EXs. Someone may come up with a different way. They may save up enough charge to do 3 EXs, right? Or they may do 2 full combos and an EX, right? That's a honing aspect. I think, especially on more complex characters, Vaughn, Anton had some interesting mechanics. I didn't get super into him, but he had something where he could go kind of explosive mode. And so balancing between the 2 modes of when to turn on your explosive mode and when to spend your explosive mode and when to stay in it and kind of gain the benefits of that in your auto attack. These are things you have to balance. That's an innovation thing. If people really take the time to look into the deep characters, not even deep, like deep is the wrong word, but I think if people really take a full look on the mechanics and an honest look of what all the characters can do, then I think people will gain a more appreciation for what they're trying to do. So it's not too, again, the long and short of it is, it's not too hard, it's not too simple, and it's not too complicated. I feel like they're striking an excellent balance, especially in consideration that this is going to be on mobile too, right? So, you know, it can only go so far, but that's not a scapegoat to say like, oh, well, it's mobile. It's just like, let's keep that in mind.
Yeah, nice.
So anyways, yeah, I sorry. I feel like I'm always so ranty, but I want to make sure I extrapolate as much as possible so people can fully understand what I'm coming from.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate that you're going into detail, especially for people who had, you know, a very marginal look at the game and at the beta and stuff. Personally, I feel as much as I've looked into it already, I still feel like I'm in that aspect. I'm dying to play it. So I'm glad you're going into these details. So it's like, it creates a fuller picture and a bigger picture of like what's going on. And and I'm also appreciating you're putting your your reasoning behind it so that people, you know, myself, I know how you think a lot, not completely obviously, but you and I, we talk all the time, but also people listening, you know, our viewers, I think this is good.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think explaining my reasoning, because imagine if it was like, how difficult is the game? And I'd be saying, you can't have that conversation. It's also perfect from my experience. It's like, what? You can't say that, right? So like, that would be crazy, right? So I think giving the small little answer, but giving all of this reasoning leading up to that is like, I don't know. That's just the way I do things. Maybe people hate
it's
that.
Fine.
I don't know.
I think it's good. I think it's good. This next one, I'm actually going to combine with some of the questions that I personally have. In fact, I'm just going to roll it into one, and it's about the rogue system. Obviously, we want to hear your general thoughts, but specifically, how engaging did you find the rogue system, like the TV part?
Oh, okay, yes.
With regards to the events available, like the specific little scripted events in the TVs, how fun were each of those events themselves, and how did the randomness aspect of it feel? I know there's a lot of, it's a string of questions here to kind of build up on each other, but
okay, so can I let me answer these one at a time. So what's the first one again? Just
how did, well, I guess just your general thoughts of the rogue system to begin with.
Okay, so let's tackle that one first.
Sure.
Before I forget.
Yes.
Because I've got a monkey brain, so I'm gonna forget.
No worries.
So what was my initial reactions to the rogue system was, I hate this. That was my honest initial reaction, was like, oh frick, I do not like this at all. This is not good. This is not going to be good. I am very worried that my enjoyment of the game is going to be hampered because of the TV rogue mode system. For context, I played Blue Archive, and Blue Archive also had a grid system where you had like, essentially they leaned more on the puzzle side, like the grids were like a puzzle, and on the map you had these different combat encounters, and it worked kind of similar to how Zenless is doing it. I dropped that game because of that system. I liked the combat in Blue Archive a lot, but that whole freaking grid system killed the game for me, and I eventually dropped it. So I was really worried when I went into Zenless that like, frick, they've done almost the exact same thing. As I began to understand the system more and more, and I began to really think about the differences between that system and the system that Blue Archive was doing, I started to appreciate the system a little bit more. It's not my favorite aspect of the game, but I think with some tweaks, it could be a solid aspect. I don't think it will ever be my favorite part, but I think they can make the experience of doing it enough that it's like, this is a good part, right? Just a good part, and I enjoy it, right? So the biggest thing is it's not a puzzle thing. It's like turn-based, or it's like kind of pseudo turn-based. You can kind of do it at your own speed. You can go through the TVs, and it's like a lot of fun to kind of go through that in that sense. So that's kind of the biggest difference. For anyone who's played Blue Archive, that was the major difference. Is like Blue Archive is like a puzzle, and it was not fun to like meticulously do the puzzles. There is some puzzle aspects to the rogue mode in Zenless, but it's more focused on just kind of going throughout a level and making some choices rather than trying to solve a puzzle. So that's my kind of initial thoughts on it without getting too deep into it.
Okay, well, I mean, I want to hear what you have to say. So you initially hated it, but sounds like that opinion turned around. Why? What made that switch happen?
Man, that's hard. That's a really hard question to answer. Why did my opinion start to change? I think that's okay. So I have a lot of answers to that. So the first thing is it's incredibly poorly conveyed. I initially didn't even know what I was looking at. I didn't know how to move. I didn't understand the controls I was supposed to use. I didn't understand what the TVs were like. There's so much information overload and such a lack of explaining and gradually like bringing things to you that like it was not a great first experience. They really, really need to tone back all the things they give you at the start. Like the very first thing should be like a singular square room with TVs, and that's basically it. They should have a couple of things in there. So that was not a great first experience. Figuring out what the TVs do is not a great experience in general. You kind of have to click on them, or you have to go on them and like find out. The other thing is like a lot of the TVs are just too wordy. Hoyoverse games really have this problem. They love loading up things with text. And so it wasn't fun. When I found a new TV square, it wasn't fun for me to go, oh, I want to find out what that square is. I wonder. I would wonder, but I wouldn't want to go to it because I knew if I went to it, I would be presented with this massive wall of text and I would just have to sit there and read it. And I'm not opposed to reading, but there's a lot of different squares to go on and there's a lot of text to read. So I'm like spending gobs of time reading. And even when you know what the square does, there's a lot of them that just like have a huge explanation. And they're like, a lot of it's like flavor text, right? So you're just kind of like, oh man, like I wish there was just an easier way to parse this information. So that experience is not great. But as I started to understand and I could make quicker assessments on like, oh, this TV is this, I can ignore some of the text, or this TV is this, or they have like supporting text that showed like, you know, here's the flavor text, but this is what's going to happen, right? Then when I could focus more on that and the flow became easier, I started to warm up to the system. But that initial kind of experience and the experience a little bit after that was rough. If I can give one really specific example as feedback. So there was a point several hours into the game when I had done many of these rogue maps before where you're in an area. So if anyone's played like a grid-based turn kind of rogue thing, like you have like a character in the center of the screen, right? And when you move, all the other characters then move, right? You like see enemies move on the map on the grid space, right? There was a map several hours in where when I moved, there were characters that would move like enemies. And immediately, that's when it clicked for me. I was like, I get it. This makes sense now. It feels like, I think that was my click moment. Whereas like, oh yes, okay, I get it, right? Like I understood the system, but it wasn't until that moment that it clicked. I think the very first map should be a square room with blank TVs, except for a couple of enemies that patrol back and forth. And you can avoid them or you can engage with them, but it will immediately click for people that, oh, it's a grid. It's like a freaking, you know, it is like a truly like a roguelike, right? Because the TVs it's like not very good to convey that like what it is, right? Yeah. So that's my like very express feedback is you could absolutely sell people on this a lot more if they had that kind of initial thing to it. And then you each level, like there's a lot of levels in this game. There's a lot of commissions. Introduce just one TV per mission so that every mission is something new and you can take it like bite size. The way that they just throw stuff at you is absolutely unreasonable, and it made it not a great experience. And it was only until, as I said, many hours later where I started fully comprehending the system that it became became like, okay, this is good.
Yeah, from watching the stream initially, like my initial reaction, and this wasn't me engaging with it, right? This was just me watching it. I was like, oh, it's like, especially there's a point in there when you're talking to someone, and it almost starts like a D&D encounter. You come upon this character that's doing X,
Right.
Y, Z, and they approach you and they say, this, what do you do? Right? And they gave you like a few options. I saw it, I was like, oh, wow, okay, that aspect is kind of cool. But the reason I'm saying this is it kind of leads to my second part of this question is, how engaging did you find the actual events, the actual screen events? You kind of hinted to that a little bit,
Right.
that it was overwhelming at first. But once it clicked in, do you think they need to gamify those little events some more, simplify them, take some away, revamp some other ones? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so kind of like what I was saying, that there's just too much text for like kind of the bite-sized experience. This is a kind of paradoxical opinion. I liked going to those events and reading that, like, you come upon this, because it did feel very D&D, and I like D&D a lot. I'm like a big, I'm a dungeon master, right? I understand that there you need lots of text for stuff, but it's the way that it's conveyed and in the quantity. So like, if there was one event every so often that I came upon and it felt more special, then I would be much more inclined to read it. Be like, oh, what's happening? I've played a couple of missions and I didn't see anything like this. This is cool. Like, huh, interesting, right? But it was so frequent. It was every mission, sometimes multiple times a mission, where I was coming upon these events. The events were cool. I liked them. They had, to answer your question of like, how did they play out gameplay wise? They were fine. Like, they were good. I'm not going to say they were bad. They were not bad or good. They were just fine. And so I thought they were a good support. But I think it's because the quantity was so high that my reaction to them is just kind of like, they're fine, but man, they're time consuming. I just wish they weren't so prevalent, right? I wish they were special events rather than regular events. They don't lend themselves well to being regular events, because I think the regular event should be combat, and it is, but it's like we're trying to share game space with this mountain of text, when I think a little bit more focus should be on the gameplay side. I think the crux of a lot of people's issues, I've heard that some people don't like this rogue system, and I've heard some of that feedback. I think the crux of the problem that people have is, if you reduced the load times, you would immediately remove a lot of the pain points that people are having with this mode. If you look at the whole mode itself, or the content itself, the gameplay, you could divide it into like thirds. 1/3 is the map, another third is fighting and the actual combat, and another third is the load screens. But because the 2/3 of the not combat are related more directly to the map, people are going to lump 66% of the game in to be this rogue thing. And they're not really wrong, because like, I would go into a fight and I would complete it in 30 seconds and I would be like,
That's it?
That's it. I loaded that. I had a load screen that was pretty much as long as this. And I run on like, not obviously the load time's not 30 seconds. I'm exaggerating, but I ran on an SSD. If they could reduce those load times, then I would go on the map. Like, I started avoiding combat encounters because I was like, do I want to load this though? Do I want to sit at this load screen just for a little bit of combat? Like, they have to do something. They have to do something about this loading, or they need to fundamentally change how they're doing the combat encounters. And what I mean by that is, double the length of the combat encounters, but half the encounter rate. Cut them in half. If there are 5 encounters and they last 30 seconds, or 6 encounters for 30 seconds, we'll say for easy math. Cut those encounters to 3 and make the encounters 1 minute. So you can at least justify the load screen and it doesn't feel so bad, right? It feels worth going to those encounters, because right now it does not feel worth going to encounters. I love it. I want to go fight some more, but I just can't. It's just like, man, it's going to be so time consuming to fight some more, right? So I think if we took that out, I think people would really start to warm up more, and myself included, to the rogue system, because it would feel more snappy. You know what? Now that I'm talking about it, that's another thing. The animations for things that happen, from like a thing happening and then you regaining control of your character to move in the grid space, too long. It's way too long. This needs to be so much snappier. There's no like proper indication of when you can start moving. So like an animation plays, and like if your camera, especially if your camera doesn't move, it's like it zooms out or something, and like something happens and it's just like sitting there. I'll like sit there and I'll be like, oh wait, was that it? Can I move now? Like, there's no feedback for the player. So you wait, and that extends the waiting, right? There's not only long load times, there's long animations. Now I'm sitting here, I don't know when I can play again, right? Like there's a lot of tweaks that relate to time spending that can be made, and I think the rogue system would be a lot better.
Interesting. Yeah, long load times kill everything. Yeah.
It's a killer, man.
And if it's this bad, I'm almost interested to see what people who played on iOS think as far as the loading goes. Because if it was this bad on a PC, and I know your rig, it's decent. It's like, you know,
I got
top tier rig.
Close to top of the line rig, right? It's not.
Yeah. I mean, if you had long load times, I'd hate to see what iOS had. Maybe the way they optimize it for the phone
Maybe
was
for
different.
optimized for I was thinking the same thing. Maybe the way they optimize for phones, it makes the loading even better. And again, that optimization absolutely can happen from release or from beta to release, no problem. That's not so much I'm worried about. Now that I've thought about how, you know, cognitively how long the animations take and how that elongates things, I'm gonna send that as another piece of feedback. Like it's crazy. So man, I really hope that gets changed because I want to like it more than I am kind of lukewarm on it right now. I just want to like it more, and because I think it has a lot of potential. I really do. Honestly, there was a point where for a while I was going into one of the, I think they're daily commissions. I think that's what they are. But it was just like I would sit on a square and then 3 squares would pop up and I would choose one of the squares, and then it was usually like a combat encounter or something else, and then it would give me, after that, it would give me 3 more squares, and they were all random, and then I would get another 3 squares, and I would just like make these essentially multiple choice questions of what kind of content do you feel like doing right now out of these 3 options, right? And then I just would like go and do it. It was super fun. It was quick because see, I've had an epiphany. It's because it was quick and snappy, and so it made the map system fun. If they can achieve that for the rogue system, I think everyone will be on board with it, generally.
Okay.
I mean, unless you fundamentally don't like it, which is fair. But yeah.
Nice, dude. I'm liking this. I'm liking hearing all of this.
This is great. I'm glad I can get my thoughts and feelings out about this because it's helping me understand my perspective on it as well. So this is cool.
What did you think about the story? How engaging was it? Like the story, plot, one and the same. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question, and hopefully it will be a smaller answer than usual. The timestamps are going to keep me honest, but this should be a short answer. I think plot-wise, the story was good. The plot was interesting. I'm not going to say it was just like okay. I think it was definitely above okay. It was good. There were some interesting story beats that I didn't expect, and I think could develop into something pretty cool. I don't want to spoil any of that, but there's some interesting stuff that happens with the proxy and the bang boo and the lockbox that they get. So that was a pretty interesting development. I want to see kind of where that goes and how that develops. I think the biggest saving grace is the characters. The characterizations are so good. Oh man, they're a joy to deal with. The proxies are a little flat, but I think that's just kind of the way they're kind of conveying
probably
them.
By design. Yeah, because you want to be able to portray yourself onto them as much as possible.
Yeah, it's supposed to be kind of like a projection type of thing, so they have generally a flat, like the opposite proxy that you select, like they have a personality, but it is kind of on the flatter side. They're supposed to be like this very capable proxy and stuff, and they're very cool and calm and collected and stuff. So like that character specifically, for my case, it was Wise. I chose Belle, and so Wise was the character I interacted with a lot. He was like okay, and I assume that Belle is the exact same. She probably gets the same dialogue, so you know that's probably the same for both sides. But like Bill's an amazing character, probably one of my favorite from a personality.
Laugh. I love his laugh, dude.
And I played for reference, I played with the Japanese voice acting. Like he's probably, from a story perspective, he's one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite. He was so full of personality. All the characters, they're not one note. They're at least 2 note, we'll say. And so that starts to get into characters that have a little bit of depth, right? I don't know. I'm not a writer, so I don't know how good that is from a depth perspective, but I thought it was okay. Like Nicole has this overarching aura about her that you're like, okay, she's kind of like focused on money and she's a little greedy, but you see these glimmers of like, okay, she cares for her team, but she's also cunning too. She's very smart and wise in like not the kind of greedy sense all the time that you would expect. And so I thought, like, it's not new. This isn't like a new revelation of a character, but it was flavorful. I liked it. And so Ambi is a very charming character. She takes movies very literally, and she's very like straight-laced and stuff. She, you know, they did a very good job. The personality, these characters exude personality. So from that perspective, excellent. I would say it was excellent. So
nice.
I hope they do more with the plot. The characters are excellent. The biggest problem I have, the thing that I'll say was actively bad, and this is something that I think a lot of people are going to agree on this, I think, and they'll understand where I'm coming from, but Hoyoverse overwrites, and this, I guess this is the same as in the Rogue thing and the events, they overwrite really bad. They say things in 1,000 words that you could say in 250 words. There's so much text, And a lot of it is just, I understand you have to add some spice and some fluff, but we're talking like a whole farm of sheep here. There is so much freaking fluff that I'm just like, I want to engage with the story, but at some point it's just like, okay, I get it. Please just like, let's pace this a little bit better. Like the pacing is trouble. It's absolutely a problem. And I don't know if it'll change, to be honest. I think Genshin has the same problem as this, and Zenless now has the same problem. Maybe it's just the writing style. Maybe it's translating. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely a problem. And, you know, I would rather, like, I want to engage with the characters, but it's so excessive. The writing and like text is so excessive. It's almost like, just give me a summary.
No, it's funny because I also had that same problem with Genshin. And like, there's that old adage with writing and telling stories, show, don't tell. And when Hoyoverse shows, boy, do they show.
Yes.
The 3D cinematics, the comic book stuff that they did. Some of that can
brevity,
be so...
You're right. The brevity in the comics is perfect.
It's so good. And some of it is so visceral, like when Miguel transforms into a hollow and like the... Spoiler alerts, sorry guys. If you were completely oblivious to the story, he like, his skull just like breaks open, his jaws like to the side and all intense like that. Dude,
Incredible.
Do they know how to show? So it's so funny that the same company can do the show aspect so well, but then the telling aspect so long-winded. It's
yes,
it's interesting to me, but you know, it is what it is, I guess.
You make a great point. I totally forgot. The obviously the cinematics are great. That's just like everyone's nailing that. Thankfully, they do such a great job of that. But the comics are the best part of the story. If they had the whole thing be just the comics and the like brevity that they had, at least if they took the brevity of the comics and inserted it into the dialogue that the characters have between each other, it would be perfect. I want, like, don't get me wrong, I want the characters to interact. I want to see them interact. It's awesome. I love it. But you need to reduce the amount of fluff in there. You can have all this same great interaction without being so long-winded.
No, I mean, that's one of the things that even me just watching was able to get. So I'm not the one having to sit there and like
have to go
through it all. Yes, exactly. So even I got that. So
and you weren't even there for the whole length of the story too. Like it gets even worse later on. I thought, holy my gosh.
Well, it is what it is, I guess. Hopefully they tune that a little bit. Mihoyo, please.
So. Please.
Or,
if enough people give feedback, maybe they'll reassess it. If not, you know, it is what it is, I guess. I'll just skim some of the things and savor my time with the good interactions.
Yeah, and the saving grace is that the plot isn't terrible from what you're saying, obviously.
Yes.
If it was both of those things, the story's doomed. But if the plot's at least somewhat engaging, then
it balances it. And the characters are great. It's almost like just like fine because the characters are so fun, but it rides a fine line. When you have characters so excellent and writing so long-winded, they're really kind of pulling each other. It's that plot that like brings it over just enough to kind of make it tolerable, but I don't want to play the story and have it be tolerable. I want to play the story and love every moment. Come on.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's my whiny take on that.
All right, so we're almost done here with the last couple questions. In fact, the second to last question is somewhat similar to my specific question, so I'm just gonna wrap it here into one. Okay. So, what did the hub area feel like to you? Did it feel like an actual real city, to use heavy quotes on that, with a community of like cast members and fun interactions? Was it kind of empty? How was the interaction with the NPCs? I guess just overall.
That's a good question. So a lot of people have mentioned that the hub area has very much like Persona vibes, and I haven't played Persona, but I've seen some footage from Persona. Like, I'm generally aware of Persona. I would say that's probably pretty accurate. Probably the biggest and kind of petty critique I have for the hub area is there's just not enough NPCs walking around. It didn't, as someone who lives in Tokyo, and from what I understand, this new Eridu city or this hub area is based kind of on a Tokyo-ish location. It doesn't, maybe that like skews my opinion of it, but it doesn't feel very like a hustling bustle. It feels kind of like we're in like a back section area of like a city that people don't go very often. So, there is NPCs there, but maybe that's just like a personal take that I have there about that. So I wish there was a little bit more NPCs and at least people walking around. Maybe not even NPCs. I don't know. I can think more NPCs in general. And I understand that there's probably phone limitations that prevent that, unfortunately, but that's probably one of my most important critiques. Is like, I just want it to feel more lively. I think the NPCs that were there that weren't characters were a little bland, and they didn't like emote a lot. Like, if you go watch footage of Joker walking around, I've seen footage of him walking around in like those Japanese areas like Osaka and Tokyo and stuff. I don't know all the areas he goes. I haven't played those games, but like I've seen footage of him going through the alleys, and there's like people emoting. There's like, it's very lively, and I wish they would capture that. I understand probably why they won't and why they can't, but I just long for that kind of feeling. That would be awesome. So that's my biggest critique on that, on like the liveliness hood of it.
Yeah, from just watching, the reason why I asked this, right, is how did it feel? Did it feel like there was a lot of cast members and hustling, bustling city? Is because I also felt it was a little empty. I haven't played Persona either. I didn't get Persona vibes probably because I haven't played it, but the vibes I got were Splatoon vibes. Splatoon 2 specifically, and kind of the city they have there. That's why earlier in the podcast I mentioned, like, what if there's some sort of social interaction? In Splatoon, there's no direct player-to-player interaction in the city, right? It's usually just the avatars of other players that have recently logged on, and you can semi-interact with them. But when you think about it, in Splatoon, as far as the NPCs are concerned, there's like not that many NPCs. Yet that city feels, or that area, I should say, it's not really a full city, but that area feels like it's got liveliness to it.
Life, true. That's a good point.
And it's because it's just filled with characters, and like, you know, sometimes you can put your message up. Obviously, like, there's gonna have to be some limitations for that for a game. But you can put messages up, and you can somewhat interact with those people as well. And they look like the customized version of the Splatoon
someone's character
avatar, essentially. Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, that's kind of where my headspace is at. I feel like it would be really hard to implement something like this. Just I don't know. We don't need to get into all the factors right now, but it's funny that essentially it's funny to me. I guess not even funny is the wrong word, but I find it interesting that even me as a viewer, not a player, someone who's actually walking around interacting, but just viewing, I initially felt like, geez, this is kind of like an empty place here. What's going on? It's supposed to be new era, dude, like the city of, you know, all this stuff. And to be fair, this is the beta, and there were a lot of areas that they showed in the trailer that were simply just straight up closed here in the beta. So maybe as some of these other things open up, we'll be able to get some more hustle and bustle, so to speak. But
I think you make a really good point, because in Splatoon, you're right, there's not a lot of NPCs, but there's the way that the NPCs are portrayed, and the feeling, that the vibe that you get is that it feels much more lively. And I think, I don't know what they have to do to achieve that. If they can't add in more NPCs, maybe they need to add more animations to the NPCs, maybe make it feel more lively. Like, most of the NPCs just like stand there, and they just like give a very shallow emote of like them talking or eating or something, and some of them just don't move at all. And maybe that's a beta thing, right? Maybe this is like a polished thing they'll do at the end, because it's kind of more on the simple side. But I really hope that they can achieve that. One thing I will say is they could even replace a lot of the NPCs more with characters. They do that a little bit, like some characters will appear. That was my favorite part of the whole thing, is seeing characters pop up. In fact, you know how in Genshin Impact, you can click on a character in their like info panel, and you have like a lore tab, and they have like quotes of how they feel about other characters, or they just have all this stuff, and you can just sit there and like read paragraphs and paragraphs of Hoyoverse dialogue. They freaking love it. And like, I hope, and this is going to be sacrilege, but I hope that they have none of that in Zenless. Okay. I hope they take all of that stuff they would have written, and they put it into dialogue that you get from NPCs, or the characters, NPCs, in the hub area. So like, I want to see, like, there was already a lot of, like, there was some of that, right? Like, I liked going to see Nicole, and Nicole went to, when she was in front of the convenience store, she was looking at some of the food, and she went, I want to get some of this post-dated, or like soon to be post-dated food, because it's going to go on sale really cheap, and that'll like cover all the food for everyone for the month.
Yeah, she's gonna give them expired bread.
Wait a second, you can't, a month? For a week, maybe, but a month? Nicole, hold on a second. But it was fun, and it was bite-sized. So I want more NPCs in that area, so I can see, like, maybe even have like one character over here doing a thing and I can learn about, like, maybe Nicole's doing that. And then maybe we can have like some other character, not even related to her, like looking over. So, you know, like in Genshin, they have like, what does one character think about another character? So there's like tabs of that in their information page. Instead of doing like a tab and a thing that I read, why not have like Bill looking at Nicole from afar like this and saying like, oh no, there she goes buying the like post-dated food again. Like, and then Ambi can be there too and saying like, you know, I didn't really mind the food or whatever, right? They can give their like takes on it, right? So like, it doesn't have to be like exactly characters having a conversation. It could be dynamic, right? There's a lot of things they could play with. And I think that would add to the livelihood of it. Maybe make those characters emote a little bit because they just kind of stood there, you know, and then I can learn about the characters because that's one of my favorite parts of the game was the characters, right? So I think those are like the biggest things they could do to make the hub area awesome, because I think general style of the hub area is super cool. I liked the NPCs that they put effort into. They did a really good job designing. You can see from the playable characters, right? The design chart for freaking characters is just absolutely nuts. It's so good. And so like the characters that they spent time in and the locations that they spent time in, really good. But outside of that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, I think, to really bring that place to full kind of life.
No, I couldn't agree more on that. That is something that was very apparent from even not needing to play. So I hope that's something, and I do assume that it's because it's a beta. They didn't really they wanted to make the hub area serviceable, but they didn't need to make this, you know, this staple of the game yet. It was something that they can, you know, take some time to flesh out a little bit more.
Right. All right, so we're doing a little bit of additional questions. We've had a little bit of time to think. There was a couple more things I wanted to talk about, and there were a couple more questions that I got asked a lot. So one of the questions was, how do I feel like the game's quality is, and when do you think it's going to release? And this is a pretty good question. So I was really surprised by the game's quality. I think the game seemed much more polished than we expected. I think looking back at Star Rail's closed beta test 1 and even the closed beta test 2, Zenless is way further ahead in a quality perspective and a polish, and even like a completion, like a feeling of completion perspective. I was thinking, okay, for sure it'll be next year, and I'm still thinking for sure it'll be next year. And we know that there's another beta test coming up after this tuning test. And so, yeah, I think looking at everything in context, the game had a lot of kind of innocuous bugs, but they weren't really that bad. Some like soft lock stuff, but there wasn't like major things that were a problem. And so I'm thinking the first half of next year is what we're looking at for this game coming out. I think maybe they could do like one beta test coming up, maybe one more at most, but I think they could even get away with just one beta test after this tuning test, because this tuning test was kind of like a beta test. And then we'd be seeing the game come out first half of next year. That would be like, I think, a realistic approach. It's a little optimistic, yes, but I think it's pretty realistic we could see it. It'll just depend on what the release window in that is. Who knows?
Yeah, I think next year sounds pretty fair, actually. That's what I was guessing just based off the timeline of when this tuning test came out and all that. I don't see it this year quite yet. I hope winter 2022, but I just don't realistically see it.
Right.
So I think
it would be really tight.
Yeah, I think first half of 2023 is probably what it'll be.
I would love to be surprised though. But yeah, with the announcement of the second beta test, or I guess the first beta test coming, I think pretty much ruled out a date for this year. But I mean, I'd love to be wrong.
Okay, so here's another question. How do you feel that the enemy and area variety was like?
That's a good question. I think it was the enemies that they had were good, and the areas that they had were good, but I think especially in the area department, it's definitely lacking. Like they had basically one kind of themed area, and it was just a rainy version and a nighttime version and a day version, and it was just kind of all the same thing. And even like that from a theme perspective, that was not very good. And even within like the levels themselves, there was only like 5 maybe, like max.
Yeah.
And they just kind of rehashed the same one. So that was a big problem. They definitely need to do something. If they really wanted to go crazy with the lore on hollows, they could just say, instead of them opening up and kind of warping the space locally, they could just be like, there's these new hollows that like open up and it's like a different universe, because it's kind of like digital. They kind of are like selling it off like it's all digital inside the hollows. And so it's like, okay, well maybe, you know, these new hollows open up to different worlds, like either be it like a collab, or if it's like just a different theme they want to bring in that's like separate from a city type of thing. But they really do need to explore that type of thing. Again, I definitely assume that will be something that they do full release. This is a beta, so they have cut back content. So, so I'm not worried yet, but it's just like, okay, hopefully that's something we see more of. For the enemies, they fared a little bit better. There was the Ethereal, there's the Hollow Investigation Association, and the Defense Force, which is the Obsidian Division. And so the Association, the Hollow Investigation Association, and the Defense Force were very, very similar in how they kind of played out. There were mechs, and that kind of added some variety. And there's good variety, I think, on the Hollows. I think one of the enemies that like jump and explode and just die was like the most useless enemy ever. They should really not just explode. At least if they have like the red area explosion, they should explode and stay alive so they can continue attacking. They have like a jump attack where they explode and just die immediately. Like that was totally useless. So they should have just like had that jump attack. They should have been just like fast attackers and just like kind of weak that you had to get rid of, because they just basically handled themselves most of the time, and it's like totally useless. So enemy variety was okay. It was definitely better than the theming area variety, but definitely, you know, we're going to need some more stuff. And I have, again, no doubts that they'll have some more stuff, but yeah, we could use some more for sure.
Yeah, something I said a lot during the live streams and stuff is I love the room they're leaving for themselves with just kind of the lore and everything behind the hollows. Like you hit the nail right on the head. The hollow could open up to a new universe, and they have biomes of, they could have like an ice one, a fire one, a nature one,
Right.
all sorts of possibilities. Another universe within the Hoyoverse, right? For collabs, inter-Hoyolab collabs, or collabs with other franchises as well. So I look forward to that, and I think I'm of the same opinion that I don't think we have too much to worry about yet. I think because this was the beta, we didn't really get much variety, but I think that's coming down the pipeline for sure.
Right. Of course, the music was good. I didn't really make initial comments on the music because it's just like generally good. I will say there's not a particular track that really stood out to me, but they were all just like really good. They were all like a solid, if I could get like a number, they were like 8 out of 10 soundtrack. It's just really solid. I enjoy listening to all of it. There's none that's like exceptional, but certainly there was very, very little that were like, this isn't really a good track. It was generally like really solid music. So I really enjoyed it. I'm not a huge music guy, but I did enjoy it enough that I enjoyed listening to it, and it never really got old. Like they loop really well, and they're very catchy in terms of like listening to it over a long period of time. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, and they fit with the vibe of the game really well.
Yeah,
all the
totally.
tracks do.
Yeah, they've got a kind of like a funk techno-y kind of thing to it, with a bit of like some guitar, bass, like kind of instrumental going on. It was really good. Lastly, I want to say there were 2 major criticisms that I do have for the game. I don't know if one of them will get looked at, and I suspect the second one will. My first one was, when you're in the hollows, the more Etherium you collect, the more variety is going to appear inside the hollows. And if you're trying to build teams around specific Etherium, then that's going to be a problem, because the more you get, the less chance you have of getting the ones that you want. So I would have liked to see a system in, I think it's Crypto the Necrodancer. They have a way to turn off certain like random items that you can unlock and that will show up, like power-ups basically, which is essentially what the Etherium are. So I would love to see a system, you know, turning off certain Etherium. Maybe you can have like 10 that you can turn off for sure. Or maybe you have like a system where you can have like more likely and less likely lists. So you can like put, you know, and maybe a neutral and a more likely and a less likely. So you can kind of sort what you want to kind of lean towards and stuff. That is definitely a problem, especially they're going to add like probably more Etherium as the game goes on. So it'll only get freaking worse, right? So this is definitely a system that needs to get thought and considered, especially considering like you have like very specific characters and like builds you're going to want to go towards, and on really hard commissions you're going to want to rely on those power-ups that you're getting. So you're going to want them to be synergistic with your team. So I really hope they put something. I'm not 100% sure if they will. On release, I would imagine they would not have that. I would hope that as time goes on and they get more feedback about it, they would put something like that in eventually, but I can't see it coming on release, but it definitely is something they need. And then the last thing, probably the worst thing about the whole game so far is the artifact system. And it's not because it's kind of copying Genshin's artifact system. I think the system in theory is actually just fine. I think the biggest problem with the way they're implementing it is twofold. They don't have loadouts, and that could just be a thing that's just not in yet. And man, I really hope they have it, because I think think the artifact system is fundamentally unusable without loadouts. It's just an absolute nightmare to farm stuff for people. So I really, really hope they put in loadouts. The other thing is the acquisition method. I don't know if that's like what they're leaning towards, but it's terrible. It's just absolutely horrible. There's no way to properly target a specific set. You can target like a specific like circle on the 6 circled thing, and it like doubles the price that it costs to get these things, which is pretty bad. But then it's like you can't have any way of determining if you're going to get a specific type or set bonus. It's just like totally random. So it's like another level. That system doesn't need any more levels of randomness. So to just throw all of the different types within that, and then you got to worry about the stats after that, is absolutely unacceptable. It's a terrible, terrible system, and they should have some other way of doing it, because right now it's really just horrifically bad. And they had my worry is like they've got a whole like menu for it, and I hope maybe there was the tuning one and there was 3 other menus that were locked. I'm just hoping that those menus are like more specific, like trying to get specific types. Maybe, gosh, I really hope so, because right now that system is not looking good. If they can fix those 2 major problems though, I genuinely think the system will be pretty decent. There is one thing missing though to that whole system, and that's there needs to be some kind of, in Genshin you have weapons, right? You have the artifacts and you have weapons. The weapon is like the crown jewel kind of centerpiece that adds like this overarching, maybe gameplay affecting effect, essentially. Yeah. And the artifacts don't really provide that. They provide like, they're like stat sticks. They provide like some bonuses most of the time, not really, big things. They're just kind of straightforward. And that's what it's looking like in Zenless. At the middle of the 6 shooter thing, there's like an orb rotating. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could put one big thing in the middle that kind of acts as like the pseudo weapon stat stick and just like has some extra bonuses that are more defined and more game changing than the ones on the outside.
Sometimes character specific, maybe.
Right, maybe even character specific, yeah.
Yeah, do you think that that's what that's for, and the only reason it wasn't like unlocked or available was because with Genshin, the weapons are tied to the gacha. With the tuning test, there was no gacha. Do you think that might be the reason?
That's a great question. That's a really great question. I've not thought of that. It's entirely possible. It's actually entirely possible. Yeah, if the acquisition method of that was strictly the gacha, it would make complete sense why they wouldn't have it implemented. Yeah, so I don't know. That's a great question. I hope so. I really do hope so, because I think that's the missing piece. There's the 2 problems and the missing piece. I really think they need something like that to kind of tie it all together.
Yeah, we'll see what they do about the randomness, or like acquisition randomness, right? With Genshin, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misremembering, but depending on which, I want to say commission, because I forget the name of it in Genshin, but on which mission you did, or domain, that's exactly it, yeah. Depending on which domain you did, it would determine what rewards you could receive, right? Do you think they might implement a system like that here?
I don't know. I mean, it would be very easy to do, I would think. You would just have a specific commission, and then you would go into that, and you would get a specific set of like drops that would be randomized. So I don't see why it couldn't happen. It's just the thing that like leads me to believe that won't be how it works is because you have like a specific shop dedicated to this whole concept, and you have a UI that's been built around it, right? So I think the way they're doing it can work, but they have to have some UI or some option in there that allows people to hone in more succinctly on what the kind of thing they want, right? Yeah. So I think it can work to a degree. I actually don't even mind the fact that there's like a currency, and you like get, so instead of having like a whole bunch of different dungeons you could do, or like domains or commissions for like all these different types, because like in Genshin, if they want to add in more artifacts, they have to add in more domains, right? They've tied themselves to the system now. It's bad, right? So they have to create actual new things. But in Zenless, all they have to do is just, they have one commission that you go in and you get this currency, and you spend that currency on theoretically any additional artifacts that ever come into the game, right? And if they have like a higher level, all they need to have is like certain levels, like a easy, medium, and hard, and the hardest one gives the best currency for the orange stuff, and then that's it. Yeah. So it's a way smarter from a development perspective. It's way smarter to do it this way. They just need to tune the numbers and give players options to hone in on what they want. So
yeah, dude, if it's just completely random, once you start getting more characters and also more importantly more artifacts, it'll become unsustainable if it's just straight up random. randomness. So
Yes.
here's to hoping that they fine tune that. But okay, that's it for all the questions that we kind of riled up. We try to take like the most common ones and combine the sentiments of most of them into things that, you know, we could easily ask here. But if there's any more questions that you guys have, let us know down in the comments. We do this podcast every day, or we do this podcast every week.
I hope we're not. Is that what we're doing now, George? Please no.
Every week, and so if there's, you know, enough more questions, we'll definitely, you know, do our best to answer them.
That's a great, if we see any more questions that you guys have, we can answer them in the next podcast episode. We can have a segment for that. Absolutely. One miscellaneous thing I wanted to say about the game is, if I can think of like random stray thoughts, the character switching feels incredible. It's like
nice. Okay.
So snappy. It's so quick. And I wish and I hope that they lean more into the character switching a little bit. Whereas like it would be fun to have characters like right now, Ao Kaku has an ability where she can hit her ability and it does like a wind effect on her special, on her EX special. But when you're starting it, it's like it gives you an indicator of like, hey, you can switch out now. Like she's going to do her thing and you just switch to a character and keep playing, right? That felt really, really cool. Because then now there's something weird about having that character on the field and just the kind of cool tingles that you get of like, oh, I'm playing together with my team now. This is great, right? It's just really cool. So I hope they lean a little bit more into that. Like it's so snappy and good. It feels really fluid. It was almost like when you're making a team of 3, you're not really choosing characters from a roster and you're not even playing 3 different characters. It's almost like you are customizing a single character, right? That's like a revelation I had when I was playing of like, I don't even look at it like a 1 or 3 characters that I'm choosing. It's like, how do I want to build, you know, the Mii's in Smash Bros and how you like customize them like that? It's like I'm building this horrific monstrosity of a triple character, and that's what Zenless is. That's how tight the switching feels, because you can like do a move and immediately mid-combo switch to a character and go into a completely different moveset and moves. That's like one of the coolest aspects of the game, and I hope they lean into that. And I think it's something really unique to Zenless, the way they've pulled it off, because it's so fluid. It's so good. Oh, nice. So good. So there's a bonus answer for you there, I guess.
Actually, you know, I think you must have read my mind or something, because I literally have a question that I just like must have skipped or whatever, but I have it written down, a question for me saying, how well did you think the individual characters played with each other? Did you find that there were better synergies between specific characters and not others? And how complex do you think those synergies, if any, how complex do you think they are currently or they can become? And you just basically answered my question right there. So
that's amazing. Okay. All right.
We got that sync going on, man.
I guess so. Yeah. Like, to kind of answer the one aspect of that question of like the synergies, is there specific synergies? I didn't have enough time. There just wasn't enough time for me to fully answer that question. Honestly, like I would only ever give an answer to that question if I genuinely felt like I had one. I didn't play enough. Some people who watch the stream will say it's because I played Nekomata too much. I disregard your answer completely. Okay. I will say, I will say that just off the top of my head, you could have characters that are a little slower, like Ben, work pretty well with characters that had CC, like Lycaon or Miyabi. Like they could freeze characters, and then you swap to a character that has like a longer attack animation. That would be, I could see a synergy like that. So that's just off the top of my head, though. So
yeah. Before we wrap up, Graham, do you have anything else you want to add?
I guess we should end with something like that, since I did have something else. Yeah, you know what? I should probably give some of my closing thoughts of like what I think overall. I was very cautiously optimistic when I was coming into this whole thing of like, the game looks good, but is it really good? And are there aspects of the game that I won't like? There are some questions that people have, like, is there a gacha? There was no gacha in the game, and there was some weird stuff that was happening with the star system. We're gonna cover that in a video. But basically, the rarity system that you would expect from a gacha was not exactly present in this game. There was a star ascension system that kind of worked like constellations. So the question is, what exactly is the gacha going to look like? Are they going to repurpose that star system into a typical rating system and implement a new ascension system? Or is that what they're going to use? So there's like questions that I still have, but overall, I was really impressed with the game.
Nice.
Like, I genuinely enjoyed my time playing it. I wanted to play it when I wasn't playing it. I'm looking forward to playing it even now. Like when it comes out, I'm excited decided to progress like an actual account. So like overall, yeah, I think people are going to be very satisfied with the game. I think it's in a very, very good spot. I'm impressed. Like Hoyoverse is really trying to build this landscape of making like, here's an open world gacha. Here's a Star Rail's coming with a turn-based gacha. Here's Zenless, which is essentially Honkai 2.0. You know, there's this gacha that's coming, right? They're really trying to get these different games out, and you can see the budget, man. This is a high quality game. It's very well made. There's some feedback and stuff that they can fix and make better for sure, but overall, I think the game is excellent. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Nice. That's awesome, man. That's great to hear. Makes me even more excited. You know, for my closing thoughts, I guess, over just not the podcast alone, but just the overall beta. I mean, a big thank you from myself to you, dude. You absolutely grinded like a mad lad, as you do. Like, for anyone who, like, I know Graham personally, and this kid is a freaking mad lad. Okay, he will just go whole hog on whatever game he wants to play. He'll just dive head first. But no,
in
like,
fact,
seriously,
I made it to proxy level 22.
I was just gonna say that. I was
if
just
anyone
about
sees at least this segment, I genuinely want to know: did anyone make it? Scour the internet if you're so inclined. I need to know if anyone got to 22 proxy level or higher.
Yeah.
I don't want to boast and say that I'm the highest proxy level.
Well, I will boast for
you
you, because that is freaking impressive, and I have not seen anyone else get higher. Most of the people that I've seen, I haven't watched a ton, obviously, but they've been in like the mid-teens. So you getting to freaking 22, that's impressive. So I mean, we got a ton of footage, so huge thank you. And it was only 3 days, so we didn't get, like, it's a weird juxtaposition, because we got a ton of footage, but we even with all that we got and all the work that you did, we still didn't get all the footage that we wanted. So but I mean, you still did a fantastic job. Big thank you for showcasing this to everyone.
Of course.
Big thank you to all our viewers. Like, I had such a fantastic time in the live streams. I almost wish I would have had a calmer weekend, so I could have devoted more time on stream and been interacting with everyone. But anything else before we close?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think yeah, like, I gave my closing thoughts. I really do think people are gonna be happy with this one from what I've seen. So look forward to it, everyone.
Let's send this off on a high note there then with that. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Something we don't often disclose, but you'll probably see in our descriptions. We have this podcast out on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, just wherever you get your podcasts, as a completely listening experience. So if you prefer getting your podcasts in one of those platforms, we have those links down in the description for you to check out. If not, YouTube's a fantastic place regardless. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
See you then.